So let me give you what I call the 10 realities of executive life. You own your career, not the company. If you were to say, Keith, what was the biggest mistake you made early in your career, and what mistake do you still see people making today? It's that one. You leave it up to other people to manage your career. Let me tell you right now, you are the owner, the author, and the architect of your career. You do not want to be the backseat driver of your career. And we really get tricked into it if you think about it. So in kindergarten as kids, when you learn your alphabet and you count to 100, they give you a gold star based on performance. Later in grade school, it's honor roll and merit roll based on performance. You go to, high school, graduate, valedictorian, performance. College, summa cum laude, magna cum laude. When I came out with a 2.75, my grandmother said, Lordy, Lordy. But the fact of the matter is, it's performance. And then you get into the real world, and it's not that performance doesn't count, but it takes more than that. But we'll talk about that. So you own your career, not the company. I said this one earlier, nobody reaches the top by themselves. So that means it's important to develop relationships. It's important to know people. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And not just on the golf course. Understanding organizational culture is critical. This is huge. Every company, every organization has its own culture. And you've got to understand what it is before you go there. You want to try and understand if it fits in. So are you working for a company that's a meritocracy that promotes on merit, or seniority-based company? Are you joining a company where there's a clique here that runs everything, and if you ain't in that clique or looks like that clique, you got to know that. Every company has a culture. You got to understand it. It's not enough to be smart, hardworking, and a good performer. I said this earlier, and I'll say it again. Results trump effort every time. The toughest conversations I ever have to have are folks who want to talk about their effort when they miss the results. Now, again, you got to get the results the right way. You can't break a lot of glass like I used to. But again, it's the results at the end of the day. Number 6. Ooh, this is a tough one. You're part of a team, not a family. Unless it's a family-owned business and you're in the family. You're part of a team. And I struggle, before I do these types of meetings, I meet with the leadership of companies, and every now and then when I push back, well, we're a family here. And I said, let me give you a story. Any NFL fans in here? Okay. There was a guy who came out of nowhere and went to a small town in Indianapolis and took a team that was horrible, put it on his back, and built the Indianapolis Colts into a monster house team. His name was Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning was in 6 year of a contract, and he had a $28 million clause in his contract that said if he's on payroll by this date, we got to cut this guy a check. He had just had a neck surgery, and it was iffy if he was going to come back. And people were saying, oh, he's part of the Indianapolis Colts family. They're going to sign Peyton Manning. He built Lucas Oil Field. He did this. I said, let's take bets. I said, I bet you that when that day comes and goes, he's going to find out he's not part of the family. 2 days later, he was wearing a Denver Bronco helmet because it's about the value that you bring. And in their mind, the value that was left in Peyton wasn't $28 million to pay. You are in this organization, you're on this team as long as you add value to Dr. Pepper Snapple. The minute you stop adding value, understand that you become at risk. You can have a family-like atmosphere, but, I got this crazy cousin, Ray Ray. I got to invite him to the weddings, But he's family. I can't get rid of him. They can get rid of you here. This is another big one. You must stay current to remain relevant. One of the things I see a lot of people fall back on is they get the degree, they do whatever, and they rest on their laurels. You got to stay current to remain relevant. The example I like to give is one that was mind-blowing to people, is that I became president and CEO of a $2.5 billion grocery chain in 2010 with no grocery experience whatsoever. And so the headhunter calls me. I go through the process. I must interview with everybody. I finally get to the chairman of the board, one-on-one, face-to-face. So, that weekend I'm reading supermarket news, and I'm understanding the grocery business, and I'm walking in the stores because I'm ready. The man asked me 2 questions. He said, Keith, the first question is, where do you get your information from on a daily basis? said, funny you ask. I said, I read the Wall Street Journal online, typically before 9. By noon, I'll read an industry publication of whatever industry I work in. I said, and just to stay on current events, I read the USA Today probably later in the day. He said, good answer. He says, now, what's the last good business book you've read? I said, wow, I just finished reading this book called Blue Ocean Strategy by Renee Montague, and it talks about blue oceans. He said, the formal part of this interview is over. He said, I needed to know that you were a continuous learner and that you had intellectual curiosity. He said, the people before you who I asked that question to in this process didn't have answers. And so I'm going to put you on the spot, so to speak. Don't raise your hand. But if someone were to ask you, where do you get your information from on a daily basis to stay current for your job, for your career, what would you say? What others think of you does matter. Feedback is a gift. I knew they told us growing up, sticks and stones may break my bones. In the real world and in the business world, what people think of you matters. And feedback is a gift. And I learned the hard way that there's 3 things you do with feedback. If it's good feedback, embrace it and do more of it. If it's feedback that's negative, but you agree that it's negative and you need to work on it, put a plan to work on it. Those are the easy 2. What do you do when you get the feedback that isn't true, you know in your heart is not true, but it's out there? That's the tough one. And we all struggle with it. I've gotten it a few times in my career. I'll tell you 2 funny stories real quick. One, I was at Pitney Bowes, and I got that same call from that same VP, and Dina, you know who I'm talking about, and she says, Keith, I get a complaint that when you go around the country, because I had responsibility for the country at this point, you do these town hall meetings, and word is you only talk to the black people. And so my initial reaction was, hell, there ain't but 3 black people everywhere I go, so But I said, I got to figure out what to do with that, because if that's the perception, I got to fix it. And so I went home, back when I used to drink, and said, why is that perception out there? And I realized, here's what happens. When I go to a city, they're so proud of me, the African Americans, and so they rush to me to meet me. And when I sit down at lunch or breakfast, they run to my table, And so it gives a perception. And so I said, okay, I can fix that. So what I started to do was whenever I would go to a town, the first thing I would do was something called Coffee with Keith before the meeting so people could come and hobnob. I then made sure that at lunch or breakfast that I would not sit at one table. I would go around to every table. Now, I gained 15 pounds in a year, but I had to kill that noise, the perception. So what others think of you does matter. And, oh, by the way, as a senior leader, it matters. So, again, we'll talk more, but it matters. The higher you rise, the harder it gets. You may think it's easy, but it's really not. You just have different problems. You got people problems. How many people think managing people is easy? It's hard enough to manage yourself. And then, you don't want to talk about that. And then you can't fake it till you make it. I know it sounds cute, but at some point in the business world, they will figure you out as a fraud and a phony, so you can't do it. So let me tell you what changed my career. I was a po-po. I went from a high-po to a po-po at IBM. I was one of the top salespeople for years at IBM in the Midwest region, 100% club, golden circle, but I didn't get promoted as quickly as I thought. And so I was full of myself and ego-driven and, went to my boss and said, either you will promote me this year or I'll promote myself. And he looked and said, okay. End of the year came, no promotion. However, I had one outside, and I got a job offer from somewhere else, and so I proudly gave him my letter of resignation, and he said, well, give me 2 days to find something. I'm like, no. I had a guy who worked for me, older guy, Neely Harrison. He said, can I talk to you before you leave, young man? Old black guy. And Neely said, Keith, let me tell you why you weren't successful at IBM. He said, you were the best sales manager, you were the best sales team, we get all that. But you broke a lot of glass, you ran people over, you got your number, but it was how you got it. You didn't help anybody, you didn't coach anybody, you didn't mentor anybody. And so people didn't want to work with you or for you. He said, if you don't change that about yourself, I don't care where you go, you're not going to succeed. Now, mind you, this guy was 2 levels below me and worked for me. But I went home and looked in the mirror. And then I did a check with my family. Because, if you really want to know the truth, ask your family. So I went to the, wife and, babe, we've been together since 7th grade. But yeah, oh, hell yeah, that's you, And so then I began to embrace this new idea. It's not new, but it's called PEP. And what it means in a very nutshell is Performance is 50% of what's needed to be successful in corporate America. And it's non-negotiable. You have got to be a top performer and a consistent top performer. It can't be a one-year, Milli Vanilli one-hit wonder. You've got to have performance. But after that, you need two other things. You need to manage your exposure and your perception. And we're going to talk about those because once I understood this, I went from a director to a VP to a senior VP to a president. I mean, literally, this was the formula that I used. So let me take you through it real quick. Performance. This is a quick one. You should get this one. Understanding what's valued. Document what's expected. Hopefully, every year, you guys and gals get, here's your objectives for the year, right? Hopefully, it's quantifiable, something you can measure. Because if you can't measure it, you don't know if you hit it or not. But here's where we miss out at. What I call consulting and reporting in on how am I doing, getting feedback. So I'll give you two scenarios. There are people who wait till the end of the year to meet with their boss to review their performance for the annual appraisal. And there's people like me who was kind of on the other end of being anal. Once a month, I would meet with my boss to go over my performance against the goals. Why did I do that? Because I'd seen so many times in my career, people wait till the end of the year and they think that they're performing at this level. And reality is, they're there. There's nothing you can do at the end of the year to fix that. Once a month, even as president, even as CEO, I would go to my bosses and say, okay, here's the day for this month. Here's the targets I hit and exceeded. Here are the targets that I hit, didn't exceed, but here's my plan to take it to the next level. And oh, by the way, here are the targets I missed. Here's my plan. Here's why I missed them. Here's my plan to fix them. And oh, by the way, here's where I need your help. Because my thing is, I didn't want any surprises. And I wanted you, he or she in the boat with me to fix the problem. And that is something that I just tell people all the time. So you'll see later I'll give some recommendations. If you're not meeting with your boss at least twice a year, 3 times a year on your performance, you may be setting yourself up for a failure. Exposure. One of the biggest mistakes I made, if not the biggest earlier in my career, was I was not a people person. And I had this little inner city mentality in my mind where if you don't pay me, I ain't going. And so if it was a retirement party for a beloved executive, I didn't go. If it was a golf outing on a Saturday morning that interfered with my basketball league, I didn't go. And what I found out is that I was missing an exposure opportunity. Remember what I said, no one's going to pull you up the ladder and recommend you or sponsor you unless they know you or know something about you. And too often we don't get exposure. I write in the book when I was at Pitney Bowes, I was going to put a district director in LA. And I wanted that person, if could be, to be Latino for a lot of the right reasons. And I went to a Nishimba event, and I invited all my Latino managers out there to an event. It was a Saturday night, the Brilliante Awards, and they all canceled on me. And I had my admin call, sure. Well, what they didn't know is I was really coming out because I knew I was going to replace the existing person, and this was me really interviewing them. They missed out. Now, one guy did show up, and I said, glad you could make it. I said, what happened? He says, well, I had this hot date, and I said, well, she'll still be hot when you leave out of here. But the fact of the matter is, you need to know who are the leaders, who are the power brokers. And there's something that takes place called succession planning. Do you guys talk openly about succession planning and what that is? Think of it this way. Think of the NFL draft. And you put all the names up on the board of all the players in the organization at a certain level, and you determine who's ready to be promoted now, who's ready to be promoted 3 to 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 2 to 3, and oh, by the way, nobody says this, who ain't ever getting promoted. You need somebody in that room who knows you, the value that you bring. You need to be exposed. You need to expose the different functions. If you're in marketing, you need to understand what happens in finance. If you're in finance, you might want to know what happens in sales. And then again, new information. Where do you get your information from? Exposure. Got to be visible. And sometimes, culturally, I was raised, don't brag, don't boast, don't be out there. I have some Latino friends who, they don't like, that's bragging. I have some Asian American friends who, one guy told me, the duck who sticks his neck up gets shot, and so people don't like to be visible. But I have to tell you that visibility matters. When I mentor and coach people, and Dina will remember this, I tell all my mentees and proteges, when you go to a business meeting like this, that's a business leader leading, you go with 2 thought-provoking business questions to ask during that Q&A session. Why? Whenever there's Q&A, nobody wants to be the first one to raise their hand. So 1, you get noticed just because you raise your hand. And then two, if you ask a thought-provoking business question, not, can we get more time off, or, can I cash in my, sick days? I mean, people will notice. Senior leaders take notice of that. You got to make sure. And then when you get the opportunity, you can't blow it. You never get a second chance to make, initial impression. And so, understand that you have to do it. So I was the type of person where, I always wanted to make sure that the right people knew who I was. And this is no matter what level. When I was here in Dallas, Texas, for Pitney Bowes, I was a senior vice president. Succession planning comes by. My boss calls me and says, good news, bad news. Good news is, on paper, you look great. Bad news is, we're headquartered in Stamford, Connecticut. Nobody knows you. He said, so here's your development plan for next year. Every month, get on a plane, fly from Dallas to Stamford, Connecticut, and spend time with the 7 business unit presidents. Oh, by the way, I need you to run this year's employee giving campaign. And I'm like, what you talking about, Willis? United Way? He goes, yeah. I'm like, I don't have time. He says, let me tell you why you have time for it. Heading the United Way campaign, one, you meet once a month with the CEO to go over the results. You meet with all the presidents. I mean, it was a visibility play. A year later, literally to the day, I got promoted to be president. One of the presidents that, I was meeting with a year earlier. Don't miss out on the fact that people need to know you. Identify who are the folks at Dr. Pepper Snapple who you need to know, and they need to know you. You got to be slicker than that. You got to be, what's your background? You HR, finance, sales? Okay. So if I had a sales issue, Ron, I got this presentation I'm working on. I'm thinking about this angle. Can I bounce it off you? And Ron said, oh, yeah. So Ron, I'll ask him a couple questions. And before I leave it, if I have another question, can I come back? And Ron said, sure. I just started to slowly sucker him into a mentoring relationship. And before he knows it, he's there. And so, again, you need people who can help you. And I'm real big on outside organizations, because sometimes when you're in a company, particularly long enough, you get to see world one way. And being members of, Black MBAs or Nishimba or other women organizations, Catalyst, you get different views of the world. This is huge. Mentors and sponsors. Who's wearing your T-shirt? In a nutshell, a mentor is anyone, doesn't have to be your boss, who is willing to help coach you or help you develop in an area that you need development in, okay? When I got the Pitney Bowes, I'd never bought a company in my life, so I needed somebody with merger and acquisition experience. So that's a mentor. A sponsor, and you may or may not know who she is someone who looks at you, values you, and they speak for you when you're not in the room. They are at that succession planning meeting when Ron's name comes up and somebody else says, well, Ron, 10 years ago, didn't Ron do something? And they go, well, first of all, he's recovered from that. What does that have to do with anything? He's the person or she's the person that knows that there's going to be a promotion to coming up 6 months from now, who puts your name in the hat. He or she is the person who directs you. So let me give you, you'll love this move. I had a sponsor, I didn't realize it. It was back in the AT&T Bell System days. And I was going for this promotion. It was the first VP job, and you want that VP title, you're hungry for it. And I didn't get it. So I went crying to my, I thought, mentor. And he said, you know what? He said, that's not the worst thing to have. Why don't you take this lateral position over there? I'm like, I'm already a director, man. I ain't trying to be another, excuse me. I slipped out of character. I'm not sure. I'm not trying to be, And he said, no. So guess what? The VP job was VP of payphones. The director job was director of cellular and paging. He steered me because he saw the handwriting on the wall that payphones, this is like 1990, 91, were going out the window. I want the VP title. He was like, dummy, go this way. Understand, you need both of them. Who's wearing your T-shirt? And you can't wear your own T-shirt, right? You can't walk around with a T-shirt saying, damn, I'm good. I mean, you can. I don't think that'll work for you. You need somebody else who's wearing your T-shirt. Last but not least, perception. What is your brand? And you guys, you should know all about brand because you're in the business. But what's your personal brand, right? Because you have a brand whether you realize it or not. When you walk into a room, when you walk into a meeting, people know what to expect and not to expect based upon previous behavior, right? What is your brand? So it's not if you have a brand, it's what is it? And people get brand when I start talking about cars. So if I say, what car is the ultimate driving machine, what comes to mind? BMW. If I say, what car is known for safety, what comes to mind? Volvo. If I say sexiest car on the road, what comes to mind? Did you say Ford Taurus, sir? Hey, if you like the Taurus, man, put some rims on it, do the whole thing. But for those of you old enough to remember Yugo, there was a car called Yugo. And the running joke was, sometime you go, sometime you don't. What is your brand of Dr. Pepper Snapple? Are you the BMW, the Lamborghini, or the Yugo? When you're not around and your name comes up, are you the Yugo, are you the BMW, or are you the Lamborghini? What is your brand? What is your image? Are you a team player? Are you self-aware? You got to ask yourself, because perception is so important. What is your brand? Do you have executive presence? Are you someone I can put in front of my customers? Are you someone I can put in front of a television? Do you have demonstrated competence? And I say demonstrated because, again, so many people fall in love with their degrees, and I'm all for degrees in education. But, again, until you get into the game, I could care less where you went to. I couldn't get into Harvard. They sent my application back with my check when I applied. In my career, I've had Harvard people work for me. Harvard invited me to speak there 4 years ago. So it's not about that. And then leadership. Can you create leadership? It's not about being a boss. That's not what leaders do. Your brand means everything. But make no mistake about it. You can have all the executive presence in the world. You can have on the tailor-made suits, the St. John knit outfits, whatever. I mean, the red bottom shoes. You can have all of that. But if you don't have any competence, you're an empty suit. You're just a pretty face or, a nice guy in a nice suit. And people will find that out. Your brand is everything. So let's wrap this up with a career checklist, and then I'll go to questions. One, take time to understand and evaluate the culture you work in. You work for a great company, but you got to understand what the culture is, how do people get promoted, who the movers and shakers are, you got to know them. Do an honest assessment of your skill sets. And I'm not one of those people that believe that you should find your weaknesses and spend all your effort on your weaknesses. No. Major in your strengths, and in those areas that you're weak, be good enough. Because what I have found is people who focus on their weaknesses, their strengths then become their weaknesses. So balance that out. Make certain and document your goals. Have a career blueprint for your life, for your plan. We spend more time planning our weddings and our vacations than we do our careers. And before you look, if you look it up, like, how did I get in this role? You were chasing a title. You were chasing dollars. You had no strategic, there are jobs I turned down that were very nice jobs that weren't going to get me to where I wanted to go. And you say, Keith, how do you create a career blueprint? For me as a kid, I knew I wanted to be a CEO of something. I used to carry a little briefcase. I was a nerd. And so I said, once I got to adult, if I want to be a CEO, what experiences do I need to have before that job? Probably international experience, definitely P&L experience. And so I would work backwards to say, okay, these are the experiences I need. I got to be put on a corporate board, be CEO and president, not because I'm bright, smart, tall, and good looking, but because I touched a lot of bases. I've done a lot of roles. You got to do that too. Create your blueprint. Seek out mentors inside and outside your company. If you're new inside to help you understand Dr. Pepper, it's a different world. You guys were kind of cobbled together by a lot of, small mom and pop. You got to understand the culture, who the players are. What's next? Seek regular feedback from mentors, colleagues, and bosses. The way you perceive yourself and the way you can be perceived is totally different. Don't be afraid to take what I call above the waterline risks. And oh, by the way, Dina, you guys are going to have this presentation, so you can send them copies. Don't worry about that. So I see people trying to take notes, take pictures. Don't worry about that. Anybody been on a cruise ship? Oh, yeah. If I put a hole at the top of the hull, the cruise ship can still go. If I go down in the basement where the crew sleeps and I put a hole in, it's going down. That's a fancy way of saying take calculated risk in your careers. The people who don't take any risks are the people who don't get anywhere. Increase your network. I believe in joining organizations. Manage your brand. What is it? And then last but not least, create what I call a career accomplishments bio. What is that? Too often all we talk about is we give people our resumes, right? Your resume just gives me time, title, and time frame, and maybe a few tasks. What this does is I take every job I've had, major job, and I say, when I got this job, here were the 3 problems I inherited. Here are the plans I took to address each of those challenges. And this was the result of my effort, quantifiably. And what I found is that helps you during the interview process later when they say, tell me about a time in your career when you did da-da-da-da. That way it's rolling off your tongue. Tell me about a time when you tried something and it didn't work out. Boom. Tell me about it, again, and it helps you show and talk about yourself in terms of transferable skills. People are still amazed. Keith, how did you go? You went to Pitney Bowes, no mailing experience. You went to the grocery. I said, well, here's what I have. When I did the interview with the lower levels for the grocery job, they said, well, what makes you qualified relative? We have a problem holding our customers. I said, well, guess what? At Pitney Bowes, we have a retention problem with our customers, too. It's called, retention of, client retention. You call it customer retention. Same thing. I had 8,000 people who worked for me at Pitney Bowes all over the country. I had 8,000 people at this grocery store, over 12. And so, again, they were transferable skills. I am a corporate athlete, okay? You can teach me. I promise you, I could come to Dr. Pepper Snap on Add Value after about 6 months because I'm a corporate athlete. That's what I do. You are athletes. You just have to be sharpened up on your game and your skill.